Several years ago, in a previous life, I logged a lot of miles on US 31 in between South Bend and Indianapolis. And for a couple of years, I don't know exactly when it started, I just remember that these billboards started popping up. I don't think that they're still there. I figured some billboard advertising salesman really created a competition between a few churches. Or it may have become, or began rather, with a renegade church startup which called itself the Rock Church. But they put a billboard up, and the message on their billboard was straightforward, eye-catching, and memorable. Obviously it was memorable because I remember it. And I'm quoting here, but here was the message on the billboard. The Rock Church, the church that doesn't suck. A few weeks later, I noticed there was another billboard that popped up, maybe a mile or two within the Rock's billboard. But it was for a local Baptist church that, again, quoting, preaches the truth, emphasis on truth, from the King James Bible. Exclamation point. And then it was a few weeks later that I noticed a third billboard popped up, and it was a little bit more sublime, we'll say, but it's simply a church that simply emphasized itself, marketed itself as the friendly church. You know, we all like to think of our churches as great places to be. But if we based our marketing strategy on what Jesus had to say about discipleship, I've often wondered how many people would actually show up. Jesus defined discipleship as deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And so today we conclude the sermon series on questions that Jesus asked and come to a question that you're not going to find in anyone's marketing materials. This question that Jesus asked is a response to a request made by the mother of two of his disciples, and it's simply this, not so simple, but are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? Now, this is another question that appears in more than one gospel. In Matthew, we heard Jan read this morning, the mother of James and John makes a request, really makes a demand. But in Mark's version of this story, it's the two brothers who come to Jesus with this same kind of demand. Arrange it, they said, so that we will be awarded the highest places of honor in your glory, one of us on your right and one of us on your left. And I think Jesus, thinking about what was about to happen, who would be on his right and who would be on his left, said, you don't know what you're asking for. But it's interesting because in both cases, right before this happened, Jesus was telling his disciples about his imminent death and resurrection. And in both cases, it's obvious that the disciples don't seem to grasp what's really happening here. But this shouldn't distract us from this heart-piercing question that Jesus asks this morning, because the disciples, or at least the people who were present, they all responded to this question in the same way. Yes, we're able. But every indication would indicate that they really didn't know what they were asking for. It occurred to me that my question would be, well, wait a minute, what's this cup? What are you talking about, cup? What's that mean? Drinking the cup in ancient Judaism, I've learned, meant some not so good things. Drinking the cup for ancient Jews meant suffering and testing, rejection, judgment, and yes, even violent death. How many of you would volunteer for that cup? It's not the cup we want. Likely, the version of the cup that the disciples wanted, the version of the cup we want, is the cup filled to the rim with some really good wine. That's the cup we would prefer. But the cup that we find in our life with Jesus has many purposes. Jesus could have just as accurately defined discipleship in this way: deny yourself, take up your cup, and follow me. For we find Jesus' cup first is the cup of sorrow. Not just his own sorrow, but the sorrows of the entire human race. See, this is not the cup that we would ask for ourselves or really for anybody else. But the cup, it's the cup that we have to bear. It's the cup that we have no choice but to bear. It is a cup full of physical and mental and spiritual anguish. You could say it is the cup of reality. It is the cup of starvation and loneliness and rejection and abandonment and immense, almost intolerable anguish. It is the cup that represents everything that Jesus experienced on the cross. It is the cup that appears in various places in Scripture. Isaiah refers to the cup of God's wrath, the chalice, the stupefying cup you have drained to the dregs. It is the cup that shows up in the book of Revelations as the wine of retribution that Babylon gave the whole world to drink. Which should remind us, by the way, that there are consequences for a nation that turns away from God. But when the moment came for Jesus to drink this cup in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "My soul is sorrowful to the point of death." His agony so intense that Luke writes, his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. James and John were part of that group that replied to Jesus' question, yes, we are able. Remember, they were with him in the garden. What were they doing in the garden? Oh, I'm sorry, they'd fallen asleep. They left Jesus all alone in his anguish, in his greatest moment of sorrow. In his loneliness, Jesus fell to his face and cried out, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass me by." Could Jesus drink this cup full of sorrows, full to the dregs with sorrows? You know, for some reason, he said yes. He didn't reject it. He didn't throw the cup away in despair. He kept it in his hands, willing to drink it, willing to drink from the dregs. For Jesus, drinking from the cup of sorrow is not a great show of willpower or devoted determination or great heroism. Drinking this cup involved a deep spiritual yes to God. In the midst of Jesus' anguish and sorrow, in the midst of Jesus' prayer, pleading with his Father to take this cup of sorrow away, what we discover is there is a moment of blessing. Luke is the only one who mentions this moment of blessing. Then an angel appeared to him, coming from heaven to give him strength, to give him comfort, to provide what the disciples didn't provide, a sense of presence. And here we take a turn in the cup. Because mixed in with the cup of sorrows, we find comfort. In the midst of darkness is light. In the midst of despair is hope. In the midst of Babylon is just a glimpse of Jerusalem. And in the midst of the army of demons is this consoling angel. The cup of sorrow, inconceivable as it sounds, is also the cup of joy, the cup of blessing. This cup holds all of our sorrows, in addition to all of our joys. All of our sadness, all of our gladness, all of our mourning, all of our dancing are in this cup because they can never be separated. St. Francis of Assisi wrote extensively of the cross of San Damiano as a shining example of the aspect of joy in the cup. The crucified Jesus on the cross is not defeated but victorious. This has been described as the resurrection cross, in which Jesus is lifted up, not in sorrow, but in glory, lifted up as the victor. Because it is here that we are reminded of what Jesus had to say. He said in Luke 12, "When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself." It speaks not only of his crucifixion and his death, but of his power and of his glory, of his resurrection. His unconditional yes empowered him to drink this cup. Not in passive resignation, but in the full knowledge that his hour of greatest sorrow would also be his hour of greatest glory. You see, in our own lives, our own cups are full of sorrows as well as joys. We can all attest to this. We all have stories of this. We keep forgetting this truth and too easily become overwhelmed by our own darkness. We too easily lose sight of our joys and speak too easily of our sorrows as our only reality. The cup of grace reminds us that the cup of sorrow is also the cup of joy, that precisely causes us sadness and become our greatest source of gladness. And only when we realize that the cup of life is not only the cup of sorrow, but also the cup of joy, will we be able to drink it. And so, we come this morning to lift the cup as an invitation to affirm and celebrate life together. And as we lift this cup, we look one another in the eye and we say, "Don't be anxious or afraid. Let's hold the cup together and acknowledge the reality of our sorrows and our joys. And let us encourage one another and be grateful for the gifts that we possess, the gifts that we share." You know, the best summary in all of language, as far as I'm concerned, of this cup is found in a Hebrew phrase. Maybe you're familiar with it. L'chaim, to life. I couldn't help thinking of Fiddler on the Roof. I was Fietka, my junior year in high school. To life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. Let's have the courage to make us say, let's live another day. Drink l'chaim. I got an A. We lift the cup of life and affirm and celebrate life for what it is. It is a gift of God. When each of us hold our own cup filled with sorrows and joys, claiming it as our own, then and only then can we lift it up for others, and encourage them to lift up their lives as well. And so as we lift up our cup in a fearless gesture, proclaiming that we will support one another in our common journey, what we do is we create community. And we acknowledge that there is nothing easy or nothing sweet about community. Henry Nouwen writes insightfully that in community we say, life is full of gains and losses, joys and sorrows, ups and downs. But we do not have to live it alone. We drink our cup together and thus celebrate the truth that the wounds of our individual lives, which seem intolerable when lived alone, become sources of healing when we live them as part of a fellowship of mutual care. As Jesus defined fellowship, or as Jesus defined discipleship, as deny yourself, take up your cup, and follow me. He also defined his relationship with us in this way. He said, I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. Is this your cup? Are you willing to lift it? Are you able to drink the cup? This cup is the life of Christ and our lives blended into one life. And as we come to the table of grace and drink the cup, we drink the cup that Jesus drank, but we also drink our cup. And this is the great mystery of Holy Communion. The cup of Jesus filled with his life, poured out for us and all people, and our cup filled with our own blood have become one cup. Together in community, when we drink this cup as Jesus drank, we are transformed into the one body of the living Christ, always dying and always rising for the salvation of the world. Are you able to drink of this cup?